Thank you very much indeed. I'm delighted to be here talking to so many of you and the team of Autodesk people and resellers at this very, very classy, impressive conference. But the theme of my talk may surprise you just a little bit. It's how you can actually, as the Autodesk team, work less, but also achieve more. As Scott just said, trying harder doesn't work, so let's try trying less. I'm going to stick my neck out and say that most of you here today work much too hard. And as a result of working too hard, you produce much too little result relative to what could be produced. I'm going to reveal a secret, how you, every member of the team, can actually multiply your effectiveness to achieve results that are many times more valuable than you've achieved already, no matter how valuable those things that you've achieved already are. To deploy your energy far more intelligently, to work no harder than you do at the moment, and perhaps quite a lot less hard, while getting results that are not just a bit better than the results today, but are hugely better. The secret to success, I'm going to suggest this afternoon, is to get more from less. More from less. That's really the theme of this last session. And over the next few minutes, we're going to see how. One of my favorite quotations comes rather oddly, perhaps, from a Prussian army officer called General von Manstein, who had this to say about his people. He said, there are only 4 types of officers. First, there are the lazy, stupid ones. Now, did he suggest firing these people? Not at all. He said, leave them alone, they do no harm. Because at least they're lazy. Second, there are the hard-working, intelligent ones. Now, they're good, obviously. They make excellent staff officers, ensuring that every aspect of a plan is very carefully considered. And third, there are the hard-working, stupid ones. Now, these people, he said, he'd really got in for these people are a menace. They must be fired at once. They create irrelevant work for everybody. And finally, there are the intelligent, lazy ones. Now, these people are suited for the highest office. So the good general was suggesting that whether you're smart or intelligent, it's actually much better to be lazy. Is this a silly paradox? Well, visualize it. Do you think that Warren Buffett is busy frantically crunching numbers at his desk? Do you think that's what Rupert Murdoch spends his time doing? Do you imagine that Jim Clark does that rather than thinking about the boats that he's going to sail? Was the value that Bill Gates added to the world a function of the hours that he put in? Or what about Ronald Reagan, who famously said, it's true hard work never killed anyone, but I figure, why take the chance? Or John F. Kennedy, or Winston Churchill, or Albert Einstein, or Isaac Newton. What all these people do or did was spend time creatively on the few essentials, and little or no time on the massive trivia that engulfs all of us most of the time. Most life, especially most business life, is trivia. Don't work to deal with the trivia, work to avoid the trivia. Save yourself for 1 or 2 things each week that are really important in terms of getting results. Spend time deciding what those things are. Then work out how to deal with them. Then spend time considering and reconsidering and preparing, and then go and get to what you want. Because, ladies and gentlemen, few things really matter. But they matter a tremendous amount. These things that really matter are often difficult to find. But once you find the few things that really matter, they give you tremendous power. The power that gives you more from less. The power of the 80-20 principle. Now let me just say a little bit about that power. The power that can be liberated by the team here. It lies in one phrase, which is finding the vital few in the trivial many. As many of you know, I'm sure, the 80-20 principle asserts that a minority of causes, inputs, or effort usually leads to the great majority of results from those causes. A good benchmark, really a hypothesis, is that 80% of results come from 20% of causes. Typically, a few products, maybe 20%, or often much less than that, account for 80% of a company's sales. More importantly, 20% of sales will account for 80% of profits. And even more important than that, 20% of customers will account for 80% of profits. And perhaps even more important than that is that 20% of our time and effort will usually produce 80% of our results. The 80-20 principle can be observed everywhere. In the movies, for example, a study of 300 Hollywood productions showed that just 4 of them accounted for 80% of box office receipts. That means that 1.3%, just over 1%, 4 out of 300, gave 80% of sales. And you probably know that on the web, 5% of sites attract something like 75% of the traffic. And money is another example. 84% of US wealth is owned by 20% of Americans. And it's exactly the same in the rest of the world, virtually the same. There, I think it's true that 20% of people own 85% of the planet's wealth. The 80-20 principle is the observation that this small number of causes gives rise to this majority of effects. And it's not really a theory, it's more an observation. It divides the world into 2 classes. First of all, events, actions, and effort on the one hand. And secondly, results, achievement, or effects on the other hand. Now, the interesting thing is that whereas we expect there to be a rough balance between the causes and the results, the 80-20 principle says that there is a predictable imbalance between those 2 things. A few events, actions, and efforts lead to most of the results that we want. In other words, the world is unbalanced, but it's predictably unbalanced. And we can be confident that we know how it is unbalanced. So everyone in this room can look for the small things that have big results. Why does this matter? How can it help Autodesk? And how can it help you personally? Simply because it's not what we expect. It's counterintuitive. We expect the world to be balanced in terms of causes and results. We expect all events and causes to have roughly the same significance. For example, we expect every hour of the week that we work to have roughly the same result. But the reality is very different. Think, for example, of Albert Einstein, who suddenly worked out that E equals mc squared. Or Bill Gates resolving to start Microsoft. Or Warren Buffett deciding to buy Coca-Cola shares before they went up 34 times. These moments in time were thousands of times more valuable than all the other moments that even these very productive people spent. Everyone here today, I strongly believe, has got the potential to exercise great insight or to make very important decisions, if only we can work out what's important, where the areas of greatest leverage lie. And this 80-20 principle provides a framework for getting at those few things that really matter and using them to multiply the impact on the world that we have. It enables us to work less and think more. Instead of getting more with more, it enables us to get more with less. It enables both the individual and the team to win. Each of you and the whole Autodesk team can achieve extraordinary results, but with ordinary effort. One of the key insights from 80-20 is that action drives out thought. A hard-working person is often too busy to spot what is really important. A lazy person wants to do as little as possible and so concentrates exclusively on the essentials. Let me give you some examples from my own personal experience. Bruce Henderson created the Boston Consulting Group at the age of 50 after he'd been fired yet again. He was very good at getting fired. He just had one idea in his life, which was such a great idea. He had the idea that consultants could sell insight rather than experience. The whole consulting industry, up until 1963, was composed of grey-haired men, it was men, who actually were able to be consultants because they had experience. And what Bruce said was, no, actually, there's another way of doing it, which is to do analysis and to use ultra-bright young people to do that. Bruce didn't invent BCG's concepts. He didn't even work with clients. Instead, he surrounded himself with brilliant young men and women, and he had a great life touring around BCG offices, opening them up, and doing whatever he wanted. When he died, though, the Financial Times said probably no one else had got so much influence on business in the second half of the 20th century as Bruce Henderson. Another guy who made a deep impression on me was Bill Bain, the former Bible salesman who created a consulting firm worth hundreds of millions of dollars, who never, ever, to my knowledge, worked more than 4 hours a day, and very often less. In the elevator at Boston, I run into Bill, always immaculately dressed, but often in tennis gear. Bill Bain, whose business carried out financial analysis at the highest possible level, very sophisticated analysis, but who personally never bothered to master the concept of depreciation. I also worked in a Bain spin-out where almost everyone worked 10, 12, 14, 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, 7 days a week. Everyone, that is, except the smartest guy. He wasn't the most intellectually gifted. He wasn't the guy who was best with clients, but he was the guy who made the most money. When he deigned to visit the office, he would sit quietly. All this frenzy would be going on around him, but he'd sit there staring at his calendar, going down a list, and working out in excruciating detail what he wanted everybody else to do. He wasn't lazy because he was the boss. He was the boss because he was lazy. The reason why incomes in the world are so unequal is because a few people add extraordinarily more value than other people. And however poor we are, this should give us hope. We can always multiply the value of what we do. How much better do you think we can do things? 50% better? 2 or 3 times better? Well, let's see. Let's just assume that the 80-20 principle applies to a particular situation. Logically, if 80% of the results come from 20% of the effort, the opposite is true, that 20% of the results come from 80% of the effort. And take the first high productivity group. You've got 80 units of output, 20 units of input. Let's call them people, which means that each person is producing 4 units of output, 80 units from 20 people. Now let's think about the second group. In this case, just 20 units of results come from 80 people. So the average that they're producing is 1/4. 20 results from 80 people. So what's the difference? In the first case, the group is producing 4 units per person. In the second group, it's producing 1/4 of a unit per person. And as I'm sure you realize, the difference between 1/4 and 4 is 16 times. In this illustration, the few methods or the people that are in the small, highly productive group are 16 times as effective as a majority. Using the 80-20 principle, if we move from the ordinary way to the most effective way, we can hope to get something like a 16 times improvement. Not literally 16 times all the time. It might be 5, it might be 10, it might be 20, it might be 50. But it is not a small improvement. It is a leap. It is a huge leap forward, and it is looking for those leaps and using those leaps and using the most of them that guarantees success. Let's do a numerical illustration of sales. Assume that you have sales of $100,000 split amongst 10 clients. The average is obviously $10,000. But assume that the 80-20 principle is actually operating. That means that 2 clients could account for, between them, $80,000 worth of software or $40,000 each. And the other 8 clients are actually only accounting for $20,000, which is $2,500 each. Once again, this factor of 16 comes in. The big client is actually 16 times greater in sales, 40,000, than the small one, who's 2,500. But I ask you this, are the big ones likely to get 16 times the amount of sales attention? I rather doubt it. The implication is profound. On average, the effort put into the first group is 16 times more valuable than the effort devoted to the second group. Another little story. Recently, the Royal Bank of Canada carried out profitability analysis, constructed a small profit and loss and balance sheet for every one of their customers. It turned out that 17% of their customers, less than a fifth of their customers, accounted for 93% of their profits. Now, of course, beforehand, the people at the Royal Bank of Canada knew that some customers were more profitable than others, but the size of the difference absolutely staggered them. And it made a real difference, and some really strong actions came out of that. One of the actions concerned a group of people called the wealth preservers. The wealth preservers was a rather polite name for rich old people. People who'd made money and who were concerned to keep the money. They didn't necessarily want to grow it. These wealth preservers were wonderful people. They were very, very profitable. They had one defect, and one defect alone, but it was quite a serious one. They died. And they died quite frequently. When they died, only a third of the heirs remained or became clients of the bank. But from realizing how valuable these people were, the Royal Bank made a terrific effort to keep the heirs, and they managed to increase that retention from 30% to 50%. As a result, they attracted some 25% more balances. I think it was 1.5 billion worth of balances in this class. I'd just like to take 5 minutes now to go through some of the history of this, because I think it's very interesting, and quite a lot of it relates to your own industry. The prevalence of imbalance between causes and results was spotted 100 years ago by an Italian economist, Vilfredo Pareto. He was looking at the distribution of wealth and income in England, and what he found was consistently a small minority of people earned a large majority of the total. What really fascinated him was that the shape of the curve, the chart or the algebra which he drew, was the same. The distribution of English wealth always followed almost exactly the same pattern, whatever time period he took, whether he took the 19th century, the 18th century, 17th century, the 12th century, or whatever. Then he took a deep breath and he looked at data from other countries other than England, and once again a similar pattern emerged. Didn't matter which time period was taken or which country was taken, the distribution was eerily similar. Now, Pareto didn't use the expression 80-20, and strictly speaking, therefore, I suppose, he didn't invent the 80-20 principle. That leap and the use of the principle in business started with Joseph Moses Juran, whom I'm sure you know is a distinguished bow tie-wearing quality guru working around the middle of the last century. Juran pioneered the idea that quality management was a company-wide issue and that it held the key to industrial success. And he used Pareto's idea to analyze the causes of quality failure. In his Quality Control Handbook, which first came out in 1951, it was just 750 pages long, very short little book, he said quality losses are always maldistributed in such a way that a small percentage of the quality losses account for a high percentage a small percentage of the quality characteristics account for a large percentage of the quality loss. Now, Juran's book was published in New York, but at that time Americans weren't very interested in what he had to say. In 1953, however, he was invited to lecture for a couple of weeks in Japan, and the Japanese people took him much more seriously, and he went to go and live there for a couple of decades. Again, as I'm sure you know, by about the middle of the 1980s, Japan had used the 80-20 principle to build up huge global market share in consumer electronics and high-quality consumer products from motorbikes to electronic goods. At this stage, we in America and Europe realized that we had to catch up and use the same ideas, again leading to a huge improvement in quality and also a large reduction in manufacturing costs. So quality really was the first wave of the 80-20 principle, but the second really happened in your industry. In the early 1960s, information technology professionals at IBM realized that 80% of computer time was spent executing 20% of the computer code. IBM immediately rewrote its operating software to make the most used 20% very accessible to computer professionals. And then the use of the 80-20 principle spread way beyond IBM. Generally known as the Pareto rule or the 80-20 rule, it became something of an underground cult for computing and software professionals. And many of the wonderful innovations in information storage, retrieval, processing, and, as you know, digital design have focused very heavily on the 20% or fewer of key needs. In the last 30 years, there's been a third wave of use of the 80-20 principle to increase profitability by focusing on the 20% of customers, products, methods, suppliers, agents, allies, whatever, who typically account for 80% of any firm or division's profits. And finally, the fourth wave, in which I've been most active in the last 7 years, has been the use of the 80-20 principle to start what I call personal time revolutions, resulting in executives becoming many times more effective at their jobs. And in a few minutes, I'll say how we can all use the 80-20 principle to make ourselves and our firm more valuable. But first, I'd like to do something that's just a little bit daring, which is to put the 80-20 principle in the broad sweep of human progress, to show how there really is only one principle of progress running through our whole historical evolution as a species. And if we really get this principle of progress, it will make it easier for us to expand our personal horizons and reach for a better future. The history of civilization, I suggest, is actually the history of achieving more from less. This is what's behind the success of humankind collectively, behind the success of businesses and corporations, and behind the success of teams and individuals. It's also the route to making every one of us in this room more productive, more useful, more prosperous, and even happier. It's only really in the last 250 years that humans have become a biological success as a result of the Industrial Revolution. Before that, 98% of the workforce toiled on the land, and population was kept down by those twin scourges of mankind, disease and malnutrition, disease and hunger. But today in developed countries, we have 2 or 3% of our population working on the land, and yet we produce vastly more food, vastly better food, more nutritious, more varied, more convenient, and all with much less effort, supporting a hugely increased population where the danger is not malnutrition but obesity. So more from less. Today, our industries and services produce a cornucopia of products that are massively greater in range, in quality, in accessibility and performance, but use far less material than they ever used to and cost a fraction of what they used to. Since the Industrial Revolution, continual improvements in how we apply science and technology have transformed living standards for anyone lucky enough to live in an industrialized country. More from less. What matters today, increasingly, is not physical effort and physical production, but the creativity of the human mind. Our ability to devise, make, and sell ever more ingenious products and services, liberated from the drudgery of hard work. So how can we, everyone in the room, get more from less? The best way, really the only way, is to concentrate on the resources, the methods, the knowledge, the technologies and skills that have extraordinary productivity. By definition, these are a few of them, They're not the way that things are necessarily done today. They're not the majority way that things are done. But they are the best way to lower cost and physical intensity while raising quality and performance. To find the way of doing things that breaks the link between effort on the one hand and reward on the other. For us to mobilize the small minority of approaches and ideas which generate results 10 or 20 times better than the prevailing way of doing things. To find that small minority of forces which give us the great majority of our results. In short, we use our imagination and we use the 80-20 principle. We see that terrific improvements have been made in the past, and we commit to making equally fantastic strides forward in the future. Marketing and sales are at the heart of this progress. Marketing and the whole Autodesk team must focus on providing a stunning product and service in the most valuable and profitable 20% of the existing product line. That small part that gives us 80% of profits. Marketing and the whole Autodesk team must devote extraordinary intelligence towards delighting and keeping forever the 20% of customers who account for 80% of our growth and our profitability, and whom we can serve, whom we must serve, much better than any competitor. Marketing and the whole Autodesk team must expand sales to these key 20% of customers and to others in the market everywhere around the world who have similar characteristics and similar needs. And marketing and the whole Autodesk team, most of all, must innovate to create something that is much better than you have or anybody else has at the moment. Much better in performance, much better in value, much better in making life richer and more exciting. And at this stage, incidentally, the marketer must become product-led. All innovation has to be product-led. You can't innovate without a new product or a new service. And the Autodesk people in the field, people in the market, the sales force, the resellers and their allies, and those in marketing, must be intimately involved in this process of stimulating and directing innovation. You are the customer's fifth column within this company. You are their representatives and communicators, their source of inspiration and excitement. For marketing and sales at Autodesk, keeping in closest contact, not with all customers, but with the most profitable 20% of customers, is vital. And I know you've been talking about this over the last few hours, know your customer and all the things that Scott was saying. You want as much as possible of their business. You want to extend the way they use our products and services. You want to give them superb value. This is the whole art of business. You don't want to provide this outrageously high level of service to everyone. You can't do that. You don't have the time to do that. Just to your vital few customers. If the level of service you're providing isn't surprising your vital few customers and causing them to comment on it, then it ain't good enough. For Autodesk core clients, the 20% or fewer that give us this 80% of our profits, it must be an eternal relationship. We can't afford to lose any of them. But if key customer retention is less than 100%, this is a fantastic opportunity for us to increase our sales and profits. Taking that retention back up to 100% will be marvelous in terms of results. Those vital few Autodesk clients should also be the inspiration for new products and services. And all of us in the room have a key role in working this out. It's one of the vital things that you do, and yet it's so easy to lose sight of it. In selling, the key to superior Autodesk performance is to stop thinking about averages. Stop thinking about customers as a whole. And if you haven't performed your own informal analysis on your own customers to work out which 20% give you 80% of profits, that too is a great opportunity. Work out which customers are most profitable and stop when you've got up to 80% of the total profits generated by your customers. If the list of customers is more than about a fifth of your customers, then you've almost certainly done it the wrong way. Start again, ask a colleague for help. Once you know your top 10 or 20% of customers who give you 80% of profits, your life will be so much easier and your performance will be so greater. So let's just recap on what Autodesk salespeople, sales management, and reseller partners should do regarding profitable customers. First, identify the fifth or 10th of your customers that deliver 80% of your profits, of all your customers together. Second, put fantastic energy and imagination into providing them with a service which is far better than they can get elsewhere. Third, make sure that you keep them forever. Fourth, increase your sales to them. And fifth, find out if you've lost any of these super profitable customers in the past 2 years and go back to them in an intelligent way to win them back. And sixth, put immense brain power and energy behind finding customers who are similar to your best customers. And last, put less effort and time into serving all your other customers so that you've got more time to devote to the top ones. Now here's another trick. Identify the star Autodesk performers who are around you, amongst the resellers, amongst the Autodesk staff. Because however good you are, the chances are that someone else is better. In fact, that's true of everyone in this room, bar only one person. So lock your sales superstars in a room together and don't let them out until you've worked out what they have in common. Ask one of them to become your mentor so that he or she can work on making you as super productive as they are. Another interesting idea is to pay attention to your lucky streaks, your hot streaks. I'm sure you've experienced them. There's a day when nothing can go wrong. When you walk on water, everything lines up to make you extraordinarily successful. These are the 3 or 4 days in the year when your productivity soars 10 or 20 times or 100 times. You must have had a lucky streak, and if you have, think back to the last one you had. What was different then? Imagine, recreate the conditions in your mind's eye. Were you feeling exceptionally confident? Who were you with? Had you just had a brilliant idea? How did you establish empathy with the client that worked so well? What type of customer was he or she? Visualize the magic moments and keep them at the forefront of your brain. Now keep that image, but open up in your mind another window, a more calculating window, an analytical window. How can you repeat that experience or come something close to it? What conditions, physical, mental, anything that's repeatable, do you need to do to get back to that hot streak? And then decide to make next Monday or Tuesday a hot streak day. When you find it works, every day can work. I mentioned Bill Bain earlier. Here's a useful story from him. He tells a time of when he was a young Bible salesman in the Deep South, trudging along, selling Bibles door to door. On one very hot day, he went from street to street, and no one wanted to buy a Bible. Then he had a brainwave. Go back to the last person who bought a Bible and sell her another Bible. And the way Bill tells the story, she bought 3 for her grandchildren. Your best customer very often is your existing customer. When you're having a bad day, go back to the last smash hit customer, one of the vital few who buys a lot, and work out what you can sell them now. Before we close, I'd like to explore one more idea that can make a tremendous difference to your work and indeed to your whole life. It's this whole idea of time revolution. And that's a story about a very successful 30-year-old trader on Wall Street who decided that he was going to go to Tibet and enter a monastery. On his first day, when his fellow trainees were hanging back, this very brash young man marched up to the top Zen master and said, "How long does it take to become enlightened?" 7 years, the Zen master replied. Wall Street chap didn't like this very much, sounded rather long. So he said to the master, "Well, I was top of my class at Harvard Business School, and I made $10 million at Goldman Sachs before I was 30, and I've taken all the best time management courses. So how long will it take me if I study intensively and try extremely hard to cut the time?" And the Zen master smiled, very serenely, as only a Zen master can do, and said, 14 years. On the other hand, you remember the story about Archimedes having a quiet bath one day, sloughing some water over the side, then suddenly leaping in delight from the tub, running naked through the streets of Athens, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Eureka, I've got it." He'd made an important discovery. It took just a moment of inspiration while he was relaxing, thinking about nothing much. Time, I suggest, is like that. It's awkward and cussed when we try to speed it up, but it's a dear friend when we slow it down. In a way, this is just the best example of the 80-20 principle, and the one of most value to our lives, this whole idea of time. If we create high value at work, we'll achieve at least 80% of what we do in 20% of our time. In our personal lives, we'll attain 80% of our happiness and our value to those we love in 20% or less of our time. And once we realize this, our lives are transformed, because suddenly there is no shortage of time. We can be relaxed, even lazy. And as we've seen, being lazy, having plenty of time to think, may actually be a precondition for achieving a great deal. It was true in ancient Greece. They had slaves to do all the work, and therefore they had time to think. Result, the greatest civilization on earth up until that time. And it's true of modern society, because most people don't have to labor with their hands. We can use our minds to create great culture, wealth, science. But you know, there's a paradox here that I don't think we've yet, as a society, realized. We've never been so free, yet we have never failed to realize so much the extent of our freedom. We've never had more time, because we've been freed by machines and by the wonderful progress of industry and science. And yet we never have felt more pressured, because modern life bullies us to speed up. We use technology to do everything faster. But in racing against the clock, all we do is stress ourselves out. Going faster doesn't work. It doesn't give us more time. It always makes us feel that we're behind. We think that time is an enemy. We perceive time accelerating, draining out from our lives at an alarming rate. But, I suggest, time is not time. As the 80-20 principle suggests, there's always two different classes. There is the small quantity of time, that 20% or less, that delivers 80% or more of what we need. And there is a much larger quantity of time, the 80% or more, that delivers the miserable 20%. Whatever the clock says, time does not run at a constant rate. As far as it matters for us, time flows in fits and starts, in gurgles, in splurges, in floods, and then in trickles. Because there are long periods when nothing much happens, and then there's that short burst which can transform our life. The art of time surfing is to track down the waves and ride them to success. Time is not absolute. It's relative to our emotions, our attention, and our timing. So the 80-20 insight, which is, as I say, an observation, is that at least 80% of your achievement and my achievement and everyone's achievement who achieves anything at all comes from 20% of their time. And if you really think about it, this is an amazing discovery. If we only make super productive use of 20% of our time and pretty much waste the rest, then time can't be in short supply. The only problem and the opportunity is our use of time. So to improve things, we don't, thank heaven, need to run around frantically. We don't have to speed up. We have to slow down. Act less. Humanity only started making progress when we stopped relying on our bodies for work and started using our minds. So here, everyone at Autodesk can make fantastic progress, both for you individually and together, by relaxing and letting your imagination soar. Probably 80% of what people associated with Autodesk achieve happens in 20% of the time. And the other 80% of our time leads to 20% of our achievement. Most of what we do is of limited value. A few things that we do and experience are of enormous value. And we get a fantastic return from those. If we only make good use of a small portion of our time, there isn't a great shortage of it. If 80% of time leads to 20% of results, then that is a very miserable return. If we take time on the top activities from the 20% up to the 100%, we can actually quadruple our value, and that's without using better methods, which again can produce another 16 times increase. Even if we allow trivial tasks to still take up a day a week, we can get up to 360% of our previous level, more than tripling the value we add. But to make this happen, we need to stop our low-value uses of time, delegate or outsource them. Never do anything that a more junior colleague can do nearly as well. In conclusion, I'd like to finish with 3 points that can help drive Autodesk forward yet further. First, have done with averages. Divide the world always into these 2 boxes. Visualize 2 boxes. This large box that delivers very little, and the small box that does deliver a great deal. And find the powerful forces and methods that you can ride to success. In other words, be selective. Don't think what most people think. Don't do what most people do. Only do the things that work incredibly well. There are always things that work incredibly well. The 80-20 principle shows that. All we have to do is to find them. Be much more selective. Secondly, experiment. Keep looking for ideas and approaches and ways of acting that are many times better than those today. They are always there. Not just a little bit better, but hugely better. Third, never forget this, that there is always a way to multiply effectiveness at Autodesk. Not to do things a little bit better, but to do them 2, 3, 10, 20, 100 times better. The 80-20 principle promises that it's always possible. All we have to do is to tap into the really powerful forces which there are around us and within us, within our minds. So we end where we started. More from less. It's not a hope. It's a fact. Over the past 3 centuries, humans have managed to get more from less, to increase output and quality hundreds of times, thousands of times, to invent things that have never been invented before, to imagine things that have never been imagined before, to make life richer and more fun. The Western world has done this, and in your sphere, Autodesk has done this. This team has done this. You have done this. The 80-20 principle is the fuel driving the successful individual and the successful team. As you say here, the power of one. By using the 80-20 principle, one team can make a difference. One individual can make a difference that can be felt all the way across the globe. Progress, ladies and gentlemen, means more from less. And progress means a richer life for all of us. Thank you very much.